I always thought we hadn't quite fully figured out the lady from Little Nightmares 1. Sure, there were a bunch of theories out there, even great ones, but I always felt like we were still missing a piece of the puzzle. Well, in today's video, I'm going to go back to the moor to see if I can figure it all out. Spoiler warning, as usual, there are going to be spoilers for the entire franchise in this video, so if you haven't played all of the games, the DLC, read the comics, etc., there could be spoilers for any of them in this video, so click off the video now if you want to avoid spoilers. This has been your one warning. There was one thing in Little Nightmares 2 that stuck out to me as a big callback to the first game. When we're in the signal tower and 6 is twisted into Big Villain 6. Get it? We see the suitcase that she wakes up in the moor, but then also this enlarged version of this picture that we've seen before. The picture we've seen a couple of times around the ladies' quarters in the first game, and there have been plenty of debates and theories about who this is. Some think this is 6, in fact this is partly where the theory that 6 is the lady's daughter comes from. That theory has been debunked by the developers though, so we can rule that one out. Others think that this is in fact a younger version of the lady, and some even theorise that this could be another girl entirely, such as the protagonist from Very Little Nightmares. What's very interesting about the version we see in Little Nightmares 2 though, is that the face is scratched out. Right at the start of the game we see 6 locked up in the hunter's basement. On the wall behind her we see a bunch of those tally marks, but also some drawings. The one on the right is of a person falling with their face scratched out. Some people think that this is a reference to Mono at the end of Little Nightmares 2, but I don't. I think this is 6 drawing her memory of the girl in the yellow raincoat from Very Little Nightmares. At the end of Very Little Nightmares, we see her falling to the ocean with the Pretender desperately trying to get to her. After that, both characters are presumed dead and the yellow raincoat floats to the surface. So the scratched out face seems to mean that somebody has died. We also see another picture of a person holding hands with a gnome, but this person's face is crossed out and not scratched. This could mean that this person isn't dead, but turned into a gnome, as we know that children are turned into gnomes from when we see the lady do it to the runaway kid. We also see them all around the nest in Very Little Nightmares, so this is possibly 6's memory of that. We finally have one more scratched out person, but knowing what was going on in Very Little Nightmares, that could have been a number of people. So going back to the signal tower picture, we can see that this person in the photo can be presumed dead. But here's where it gets complicated. If we are assuming, like most people are, that this entire game takes place before Little Nightmares 1, then the person in the photo might not be dead yet. The suitcase we see here is potentially foreshadowing, almost an echo of the future, so we don't know if this picture here is the same. Time in the signal tower is broken, we've already covered that in my timeline video, so we can't safely assume that all of this is in the future, but the majority of things here do seem to be a reference to the moor. So to refresh your memory of Little Nightmares 1, the moor arrives at the same time every year but always in a different place. People travel to and board the moor to enjoy an all-you-can-eat buffet, which is great for these people as they seem to be obsessed with food. But if you played the first game, you'll know that the moor holds a number of dark secrets. The first big one is that the children are being held captive in the depths of the moor, and at some point in their lives seem to be wrapped up and sent to the kitchens, presumably to be turned into food for the guests. The second big secret, which is a little bit more hidden, is that it seems like the guests themselves are being fed to the other guests. There is a room in Little Nightmares that has a man in a deep sleep with his hand in a bucket. Someone is testing to see how deeply he is sleeping. This fact, combined with the fact that we can see a room of identical size to this one floor away, with a chef chopping someone up, hints that the guests aren't actually being served that 5-star food like they thought they were. Now, at the top of this weird food chain watching over everything is the lady. The lady has dark powers, and I think she learnt these from her time spent at the moor. If you look in her quarters, she has a huge library of books, but more than that, some of these books definitely look like magical tomes to me, with eerie runes and some of them even being part of hidden mechanisms. These books are clearly important, and there's so many of them. They also seem to have been rifled through, which could be a hint that the lady was desperately searching for some knowledge. Why have a hidden room here? Perhaps to read the books that you don't want anyone else reading? But I've always thought that the lady has been consuming the essence of the guests that she is fattening up. When 6 kills the lady, we presume she takes her power. Once 6 then starts to leave the moor, she can very easily dispatch the guests that try to eat her. But looking at 6's new powers, and the powers of the lady, you can see that this almost draining effect goes on, which to me heavily implies that this magic has the ability to drain or consume the life force of others. Pretty simple theory, and it would easily fit in with the cycle of consumption or the ecosystem of the moor. The children feed the guests feed even more guests, the guests feed the lady, and then finally the lady feeds 6. Ah, the circle of life. But I still think there is one thing here that is overlooked, one thing that I don't think I have heard anyone theorize yet, although I'm sure you will correct me in the comments below if this theory has already been made, but I don't think the lady needs to consume the guests at all. This is all just one big cover-up for her true goal, to consume the children. Let's take another look at the lady. At first glance, she seems the most normal of all the adults here. She's not massively overweight, she doesn't desperately seem to need food like the guests, she wears clothing that is reminiscent of a geisha, which fits in with her theme of being a hostess, and she calmly watches over the guests as they arrive. She also seems to have at one point been very attractive. Looking at her portrait in her quarters, she seems far more normal than anything else we have seen in this entire world. Sorry teacher fans, and I know you exist out there, but the lady would be the one that I take for dinner. Or second thoughts, maybe not for dinner. But when we see the lady in the Residence DLC, we can see her looking into the only unshattered mirror, and we can see that her looks are now all an illusion. She looks old, ancient in fact, and her face is sagged and twisted, which seems to upset her greatly. We can also deduce that she is a very vain woman. She has a huge number of mannequins, which presumably held a huge number of outfits, and an equally large amount of mirrors. All those, combined with the fact that we see her looking at her face and sobbing, implies that she cares about her looks a great deal. So again, a fairly obvious connection here is that the lady found some kind of power here in the moor, some dark magic. Somehow she has also become twisted, ruining her looks, which pains her greatly. From the first game, I thought it could be the magic she found that twisted her. Maybe she found a way to stay alive a lot longer than she should have. After all, we see a picture implying that there were a number of ladies at one point, but now she's the only one left. The other ones seem to be shorter than her, which implies they were younger, yet they've all gone. But from the second game, we can see that almost everything in this world is getting twisted, and the signal tower could well be the root cause. So at this point, I'm forced to leave this up to theory. Maybe the lady used to live in the Pale City, maybe she visited once, or maybe she watched the TV somewhere else. We see at least 2 of them in the moor. Either way, she is now consuming the essence, maybe the souls of the guests, for some reason. But we are still not done. You see, there are a bunch of clues in the lady's quarters that point towards her actually wanting to consume children. For one, we see the shadow children and gnomes. Gnomes are children that have been transformed. We see the lady do that, and we can also see her using her drain powers to do so, but then we also see these children made of shadows, wearing masks. When the runaway kid shines the torch on the shadows, they eventually die and their masks fall to the ground, shattering. Which is a very cool parallel to the eye and how that does the same thing to living children. But the last time I played this, I also found another big clue in the lady's quarters. We can see a bird cage with what looks like to have a child inside. Now this got me thinking, children are being brought to the moor, kept in cages until they are fed to the guests. Why go through all of this trouble when it would be just as easy to find other sources of food? We can see that the moor has an ample supply of fish, which makes sense since the concept art for the moor shows fishing nets, and the moor is huge. We also see that the kitchens are well stocked, and there appears to be meat that doesn't look at all human. It almost seems like the children are unnecessary. I mean, hell, if it's even just for food purposes, then why not wait until they grow up a bit before killing them? More meat, right? But no, it's not the meat that the lady wants, it's their youth. This makes so much sense in my head. The lady is desperate to be young again. What better source of magical fuel to make that happen than by stealing the youth of the children? The lady either hopes to become young and beautiful again, or hopes to sustain the illusion. Perhaps at this point this is the only thing keeping her alive. The thing that really locked this in for me is that we see a conflicting message from our time with the lady. At one point she is seen in her room surrounded by dolls, stroking one, almost caring for it in a very maternal way. There are also a number of pictures around her quarters, but the ones in her bedroom are all of children. She seems to have at least at one point cared about them. But what ties this all together? One of the pictures has been half covered up with the eyes scratched out. If we take the symbolism of scratched faces from earlier, then this person, a child that the lady cares enough about to have a picture in her bedroom, is dead. Here's where my theory comes into play. The lady, at some point, figured out that she could siphon the life essence of children to keep herself young and beautiful. Thus, she began to consume children, locking them in cages so she could get her daily dose of vitamin Y. This causes the children she consumes to leave their soul essence behind, forever haunting the lady's quarters. At some point, however, she began to feel the same effects that the guests do. She got hungrier and hungrier, perhaps due to the signal tower, until one day in a fit of extreme hunger, she blindly consumes a child she cares deeply about. Maybe even her own. This evil act causes her to twist and corrupt into this horrible form, her true ugliness revealed. Out of a mix of shame and regret, and in an effort to stop herself becoming even more corrupted, the lady devises a plan to have the children raised out of her sight so she won't be tempted again. This time she has them fed to the guests so she can continue to feed on their life essence that she needs to stay alive, but this time she doesn't have to see the evil that is happening, therefore not becoming more twisted and corrupted, forever trapped in this cycle. If she stops, she will die, but if she eats the children directly, she becomes physically and metaphorically more ugly. In my last video, we talked about how Mono's greatest fear was being alone, and how that fear shaped his world around him. This fits with this as well. The lady's greatest fear was to become old and ugly, and that fear shaped her world around her too. This is what I meant in my last video about the world of Little Nightmares being a nightmare. I didn't mean they're actually asleep, but the metaphorical representation of their worst nightmares is manifest in the world they see around them. Think about it. The lady's worst fear is to become ugly. What do many people, and I'm very sad to say this, but especially women, fear? Losing their looks. Some are even afraid of becoming fat, and the lady is surrounded by obese people. In fact, if we compare her body type to the guests, she is very skinny. She is scared of becoming old, another fear many people have, but fading looks is yet another thing that a lot of women fear more than men, or perhaps they're just more honest about it than men. The entire moor could also be viewed as the lady's worst nightmare come true. Losing a child, pretty much the worst thing that can happen to a woman, so yep, that's in her nightmare world too. The moor is the lady's nightmare, so it became the lady's nightmare, and now it's a nightmare to all who view it. Now here is an alternative explanation of what happened to the child that the lady killed. We've already established that it's possible she is draining the life essence out of children. Now what if the time that she did it directly, it didn't actually kill the person? If she's draining their youth essence, it's possible, especially in this twisted world, that that person stayed alive, but their youth had been ripped away from them. Their youth had been stolen, which would leave them old. Who else do we know that's very old in Little Nightmares and female? The granny. Is it possible that the granny was the young girl that the lady stole the youth essence from, and the lady couldn't bring herself to kill her, so she locked her down into the depths instead? If we read the description of the depths, it reads as follows. Others lead the escape, but the kid drops down into the depths of the moor. Little does he know that this murky place is home to the granny. Abandoned to decay and rage, she will let no one go. Abandoned. Abandoned to decay and rage. Somebody abandoned her down here, and we already assume that it was the lady that did this. What if the reason why she abandoned her down here is because A, she couldn't bear to look at her in the way that she is now, B, she couldn't live with her guilt, and C, the granny is so angry at the lady because she stole her youthful essence. This would make the granny such a more poignant character, and the fact that the runaway kid kills her could explain why the lady acts so aggressively towards the runaway kid in the first place. It's an interesting theory, but if my theory about the lady siphoning the youth essence out of children is true, it is absolutely possible that some of those people survived. Maybe the original ones got chopped up and fed to the guests, but this one for some reason has been kept alive, and we haven't really seen any other references or hints towards the granny. In fact, she's one of the most mysterious characters of the first game, so it could be a nice little explanation of how she came to be down there. And after all, we see that she is being kept alive. They are feeding her, food is regularly thrown down there for her to eat, which is also very strange. Why keep her alive if she's not important in some way? Maybe she's not important, but she's important to the lady because, again, she's one of the children that we see in the pictures in the lady's bedroom, which means she has significance to the lady. Possibly a daughter, possibly a family member, who knows? But either way, this could be the child that caused the lady to look the way that she did. This was the one that broke her. So that is my theory on the lady's darkest secret. She has to consume living children in order to sustain her magic, in order to sustain her illusion. This would make her end even more poignant. She's been feasting on these children all of this time, and what is the thing that kills her? A child who feasts on her. This theme of cycles really plays into the second game as well, and I do think that Tarsier Studio definitely have a lot of themes across both games that tie them in together, and while both games can be interpreted in so many different ways, whichever one you prefer is completely valid, I do like how there are similarities in both, and actually going back to the first game now after playing the second one, I'm starting to think about it so differently, even though we didn't get any real direct references to them all, not that many anyway. Even though we really didn't get many of our blanks filled in, we now have a different viewpoint on how we look at those blanks, and so our stories and our theories are starting to change, and I really want to go back to the first game now and play it all the way through to see what I can find from Little Nightmares 2. So if you have enjoyed this video, and I hope that you have, I have a bunch more theory videos just like this on the channel. I also have a bunch of horror content. I'm going to be doing some more horror games very shortly on the channel. I hope you enjoy those. There's going to be a couple of videos on the screen you might want to give a click here. If not, no problem. I hope you have enjoyed, and I will see you next time.